All right, today's video, I wanted to talk about what if I relapse? I think there's a genuine fear with everybody. What happens if I fail on this journey? What happens if I can't find the courage or the fortitude or, just something happens along the way. And, it is a journey of different challenges, that's for sure. I hate to look at it like relapse. Once you are on that path and you understand yourself and your life with alcohol, and you start to get a sense of yourself without alcohol, a sense of who you can become, what you can become, the life that you can live. It's only a matter of time. Even if you give in to temptation in the moment, it's only a matter of time before you go on, right? So, once I understood in my own life that my whole reasoning for doing this, the decision for me to stop drinking alcohol was always to be a better dad. And it was the decision to become a better dad before I decided to stop drinking. It was that decision to become a better dad that really highlighted where the bottleneck in my life was, what was holding me back, not just from that perspective of how I looked at myself, but also so many different areas of my life, health issues. There was, before I stopped drinking alcohol, I couldn't stand on a chair. My knees were that bad. I had persistent problems with my stomach, digestive system, heartburn all the time. And it just felt like an old man when I was in my mid-40s. So, it was a huge thing. But it was, these things build up over time. I stopped drinking alcohol for 10 months at one stage. I've also had many, many attempts at moderation. And every time you fail at moderation, it's a failure. You take it on as a failure. But looking back, once I see where I am now, see how much has happened in my life, how much change has happened in my life. And I look back on all those times of moderation as just stepping stones that I needed to go through a certain way of thinking. My culture, we all come from a culture of drinking, where drinking is seen as normal. Most of us see alcohol as a normal thing in our own lives growing up, from our parents, from our extended family, from their friends, from our friends growing up. And there's that pressure to drink because it's normal. So I think all of that adds to the programming, and we have to reduce that programming a lot as you're trying to get away from it, as you're trying to figure these things out. Moderation for me was always about trying not to stop drinking because I enjoyed the drinking, enjoyed it. When I look back at all of the times that it was the events that I was enjoying. It wasn't the alcohol. It was the events. It was the things that I was doing. It was the people that I was with. If I ever drank on my own, it would always be, it was never a happy experience. I think it was a deliberate attempt at some stages to put myself into a bad frame of mind, or the alcohol just put me that way, So I know that the alcohol didn't create the good times in my life, because when I was on my own and lonely, there was not good times. That there were just times of trying to anesthetize myself. It was always looking back at the mindset that failed me, that the alcohol wasn't the problem, that it was the amount of alcohol that I drank was the problem. There's so many of those different ways that you can look at things. And it was only when I started to look at my life and to think, it was any amount of drinking, any of this stuff going into my body was a bad thing. So the more you make progress in life, the more you make progress without alcohol, and you start to stretch that tenuous attachment to the old thinking, to the drinker's mind, the habit inside your brain, the programming, everything to do with why you drink in the first place. Once you start to stretch that connection, you start to build a life without alcohol, you start to see that my life is so much more fun. My life is so much more enjoyable. It's so much more, I'm getting so much more contentment out of the things that I'm doing now, because I never have to go back to that old way. I never get up with a hangover anymore. Never have to think about getting back for a drink. I never have to think about driving anymore. I never have to think about, all of these things that are associated with that drug habit. I look at alcohol now and I hate the thought of any drop of alcohol going into my body because of what it represents, of that wasted time, those wasted opportunities, the wasted potential. And we can never go back. I saw a comment there. from a father who was saying, I wish I could go back and play the card again, start over again. And you can't do that. It's just, that's the fact of life. Imagine if you could do that. Would you change? If you knew that you could keep going back and doing it over and over again, would you actually change? The change happens because you know you can't go back. And the knowledge that you have about that buildup of knowledge from me going through all of those moderation stages, failing at that moderation, going back to the old way of doing things, and even worse, that's what builds up the resilience then and the courage inside of yourself to say, yeah, I've got to do this. I've got to progress now. And once you get to that stage where you're progressing in your life so much without alcohol, there is no way that you will go back. You'll never go back. I can't think of one single reason why I would put alcohol into my body again. Even if I want a pain relief, there's a lot better pain reliefs out there, right, than alcohol. So there's no risk of failure the more that you stretch that connection, the more that you put more time and you build in your life. So we cover a lot in the main program about values and the importance of looking at your values and that conflict of values that we have. One of the big things in my life was that I valued the alcohol more than I valued my relationship with my son. And it's hard for me to look at it like that. But the amount of times that I spent in the pub instead of being at home with him, the amount of times that I encouraged him to have a few drinks with me because that's what I wanted to do. That was my thing. And it's not like I'm looking at that and going and trying to beat myself up about it. It is what it is. I can't change any of that. I can't change the fact that I did any of those things. I can't change the fact that I said any of those things, but you can change what you do moving forwards. Knowledge is great power. Being honest with yourself. I spent so much of my time trying to hide these things. And once you're in that frame of mind of trying to hide these things, you are your best delusion, right? You are the person who can lock away these things because you know all the buttons to press. You know all the places to hide these things. So look, we're going to be doing a lot more videos on this as we're moving through. In the meantime, if you have had a relapse, if you have given into the temptation, then figure out what went wrong. Figure out specifics of why were you in that situation in the first place? What time of day was it? Who were you with? What was the actual context of the slip? Think about the stories you would tell yourself, not just before, but that have been building up inside your own mind for a long time. Sometimes we can suppress those things without thinking too much about them. And then once you figure out specifically what went wrong, it's making sure that it doesn't happen again, right? That's a big one. So yeah, I hope you got something out of that today. I'll speak to you again tomorrow. Take care of yourself. Keep the alcohol out of your mouth. Onwards and upwards.